The state of New York owes the New York City Department of Education $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion. That's important. And I know what happens is people say, well, education, education always wants more money, and we can't just throw money at the issue. Well, for just one time in the 30 years I've been an educator, I wish we would have thrown money at the issue. We've never thrown money at the issue. But the fact of the matter is that we are owed $1.4 billion. If we were owed and actually paid the $1.4 billion and we actually put that into the Fair Student Funding formula, you would see an immediate increase in funding so that principals at school sites could hire more teachers to reduce class size. There's a direct correlation between funding and being able to reduce class size. There's no other way to say it. So how could we do this now? There's a lot of things that we could do. We could cut lots of other programs. We could cut social workers. We could cut counselors. And by the way, I'm not advocating for that. In fact, I think we need to hire more counselors and we need to have more social workers. But what could we do? You could get rid of a lot of those positions that don't necessarily have to do with class size. Use that funding to hire more teachers, which then you could reduce your class size. Nobody wants to do that. I'm not advocating. That's not a smart thing to do. But there is a direct, I can't say this enough, a direct correlation between funding that goes directly to the schools and how you're able to then have enough staff to reduce your class sizes. We put principals in a horrible position because we give principals the decentralized authority to make decisions along with their community in their communities. But what we never talk about is that principals don't have the full array of funding to actually be able to make some of the decisions they want to make. And funding class size reduction is one of those things. So, yeah, some principals in the audience? Yeah. So that being said, I will tell you, I will give a lot of credit to our city council and to our mayor. This school year, they invested over $200 million into the Fair Student Funding formula, which we sent directly to schools. So whereas when I walked into the district on April 2nd, the floor was about 87% of that Fair Student Funding formula. Every school this year is at least at 90% of the Fair Student Funding formula. Some middle schools saw over $200,000 in an increase in funding. So you can imagine if we were able to get that additional money that's owed to us, what we could do. What can you do? You're voters. What can you do? You're very actively involved in District 30. So as you think about who is asking you for your vote, excuse me, you need to ask them, are you going to fully fund the investments in the student funding formula, the Fair Student Funding formula? And are you going to fully fund the $1.4 billion that is still owed to the city of New York around funding for our schools? Unless we hold our elected officials accountable, and again, I just want to tell you, your two elected officials that I mentioned here today are already on board. They're leading the choir. But we need to make sure that Albany understands that the funding is critically important to what happens in our classrooms every single day. That's what I'm going to ask you to work with us this legislative session on.
November 6th. Vote.
November 6th.
Just for everyone.
Keep it real with you. When I was sworn in as the Chancellor of Education for the New York City Department of Education, I raised my right hand and I swore to follow the law and the Constitution of the United States and the state of New York and all of the laws pertaining to education. The law, la ley, in New York City, in New York State, says that we have to administer the state exams. Now, there's a lot of things that we can do about influencing what that state exam looks like. A lot of stuff has been done. It used to be 3 days, now it's 2 days. Teachers didn't have a voice in what those questions were or whether it was aligned to the state standards. We've had teachers now actually weigh in and actually have some voice in what those tests look like. Are they perfect? No, but they're much better than what they were. We used to have a time limit on what the time students had to complete those exams. They no longer have a time limit. So there's been some progress. But I want to be really clear, like there are a lot of very passionate parents out there that are like really, really dedicated email writers to me telling me just refuse to give the test. I'm not going to break the law. I'm sorry. We have to do it. So what I'm going to spend my time on is making sure that the tests are not only aligned to what we should be learning in our classrooms, but that they're not so overly egregious that teachers feel like they have to give the test or spend time in math and science, or math and English language arts because of these tests. Now, why is that important? Because I am also a big believer that we have to educate the whole child. And a child should have science. They should have social studies. Heck, I was a social studies teacher, but I was also a mariachi teacher as a teacher, right? So every student should study mariachi in every single, no, I'm just kidding. But they should study the fine arts. A student should dance, move, draw, create every single day as part of their experience. So what have we done about that? You cannot blame teachers, because I'm really glad to know that this is no longer the paradigm. But prior to my arrival, I understand that in the state of New York, at one point, there was a linkage between student test scores and teacher evaluations. That is backwards, and that's ridiculous. Because if you're a teacher, most teachers that I know have responsibilities. Most teachers that I know live in some kind of an abode that they either pay a mortgage or they pay rent. Most teachers that I know like to eat, so they need food. So if your job is predicated upon the test scores of your kids, and your kids are going to be tested in English language arts and math, I'm no Einstein, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to spend a lot of time in English language arts and math. So you cannot blame the teachers. So I'm really thrilled that I didn't have to fight that battle. Once I got here, I understood that the state of New York has now decoupled teacher evaluation from English scores and math scores. And by the way, when you look across the world, there are very few to none of countries that are doing well that link test scores to anything. So it's not even supported by the best practices. So we have conditions now here in New York City where teachers shouldn't feel like they have to concentrate overly on just English language arts and just mathematics, right? We've decoupled that, we've delinked that. The next round of that work is trying to get our community, all of us, to stop using test scores as the end-all be-all. Using test scores for where you're going to buy a house. Using test scores for where you're going to send your kid. Using test scores for where you're going to judge whether a school is a good school or a bad school. If there's any advice I give to parents, and I get asked, what advice do you give to parents when choosing a school? If there's any advice is, don't listen to your neighbor. I don't mean that disrespectfully, just don't listen to your neighbor. Like you wouldn't listen to your neighbor to decide who you're going to date. So don't do it for you're going to choose a school. Actually go to the school. The school that's around the corner, go there. Meet the principal, meet the teachers. You're going to look at the test scores, you're going to say, I have some questions. Let people talk about what they're doing. Get a feel for the school. Is this a place where it's going to be a nurturing environment? And that's why I mentioned it, because it's the second part of that question. You cannot have a school that is so focused on academics that it becomes one of those no excuses, academics only environment. You have to understand that our children, even in the beautiful District 30, where people know each other, right? Where you have homes, you have single family homes, you have a little bit of a yard, you have play spaces. It's not the urban apartments. Even in District 30, you live in an urban environment. You live in a big city. So the very fact that our children are living and growing up in a big city exposes them to big city challenges. Lots of big city challenges. I'm not even going to go through all of them, but you know what I'm talking about. So the notion that students will come perfectly ready to come to school and learn and just neatly fall into a classroom and be ready to learn is so misconstrued in our way of thinking about education. So you have to pay attention to the social-emotional aspects of a classroom. You have to make sure that it's a warm, inviting environment. You have to make sure that there's training for our teachers to understand not only how to recognize when a student is in trauma, but that a teacher knows if a student is in trauma, who do I connect that student to? Because I don't expect a teacher to be the expert in being able to counsel that student, but I do expect the teacher to know who and to be trained on who they refer that student to so they can get the help that they need. And I'll give you an example, a true example that has happened in New York City. So that's why we're investing in social emotional learning training, restorative practices training. We're doing implicit bias training because all of us have biases. That's not the issue. The issue is how do we understand what those are, and then how do we mitigate those so that we don't project our biases on our students, right? But I had a town hall in which I had teachers, and one teacher shared with me that you might remember there was in one of our boroughs a situation where a student had jumped off of a roof in a building in one of our boroughs, committed suicide, young student. That student had a younger brother. So the next day when that happened, the younger brother came to school, and obviously the younger brother was not attentive, the younger brother was not submissive to authority, the younger brother was not prepared for school. All of the signs were that this kid was just going to be recalcitrant today. The child had an attitude. Why do you have an attitude today? So what the teacher shared with me was that what she did is she took the time instead to have an approach that is law and order. You're not sitting down, you're not taking out your materials, you're not behaving, you're not answering my questions. Law and order, follow the rules. Instead took a love and compassion approach and said, come here. What's going on? You're not yourself today. What's going on? And it's when this teacher found out that his older sister had just killed herself the night before, and that he had been up all night, and that the family's in turmoil, and the family still felt that even in the midst of all of that tragedy and trauma, the best place for that child was not at home, but at school, where they knew that child was going to be loved and taken care of. Now, can you imagine if the teacher would have taken the different approach and done the law and order? You've just added to the trauma of the child. So when we talk about a very extreme example, but a true example right here in New York City, but when I talk about that, it illustrates why it's so important that we create conditions in our schools where students feel accepted, they feel validated, they feel at home. And I'll get people ask me, what are you doing about school safety? Right? And especially after there are incidences across the country, that's probably one of our questions. So see, I'm gonna save you time. School safety. If people want police officers, people want armed people at the doors, they want metal detectors, they want screening, they want barbed wire, I'm going to tell you that that has a modicum of effect, a very small modicum of effect. But I will tell you that the United States Secret Service did a study going all the way back to Columbine of every incident of school shootings in America. And what they found is in that study, in every incidence of a school shooting, they didn't include the most recent one in Florida, but based on what we know now, it would have probably had the same findings as this study. In every incident of a school shooting, somebody on that campus knew what was going to happen. Somebody suspected it, somebody was told about it, somebody thought about it. They even highlight an incident in Alaska where a group of friends of this shooter had told them, tomorrow morning, I'm going to come in and shoot up the place. These kids actually came to school early, and on the second floor, they had like a little veranda with a rail. They came early and brought their coffee and just stood there to see, right, is he really going to do it? And sure enough, he did it. So why am I telling you this story? Because there is not a metal detector, there's not barbed wire enough, unless you want our schools to look like prisons, that can protect you against that. But what the Secret Service found was probably the most effective deterrent to school violence is to create environments in schools that students feel safe, They feel welcomed, they feel validated, and they know that there's an adult, a trusted adult that they can go to when they see something, they suspect something, they hear something, and that they know it will be followed up on and it will be anonymous. So if you can do those three things, safe environment, trusted adults, anonymity for the reporting of what those things do, what those things are, then you will create an environment where the entire student body now is mutually responsible for each other's safety. If I hear something, I'm going to say something. If I know something, I'm going to make sure somebody knows about it. And one of the things that people always ask me when I talk about that, somebody will always say to me, well, do you have the data to show that that's really true? Well, how do you prove something that didn't happen? It's really hard. But I can tell you that there are numerous reports that I get where people will report through our system. Our principals are great at letting us know that such and such student came and reported that another student was having a bad time and may have a knife, or a student has made threats. And we're able to intervene and get to those students before they ever come to school. And in most of those cases, kids are just talking. In some of those cases, they do have a knife. They have made a threat. So I will tell you that is the most effective way of being able to keep our schools safe. Now don't get it twisted. I'm using student vernacular. Don't get it twisted. Because there are those situations where we do need to harden our facilities. We do need to have metal detectors. But that should be the exception, not the rule. And I'm happy to tell you that we have the most lauded anti-terrorism public safety organization in the world that we have on retainer. We work with them all day long. It's called the NYPD, right? NYPD. And we have an intimate relationship with NYPD where we are always looking at our schools. We're looking at community incidences of crime. We're looking at their crime stats. And we make decisions about, well, maybe we should put in wanding here, or maybe we don't need it anymore there. So we are very, very intertwined around school safety and making sure that we know what we need to do. But the whole social emotional learning and the positive behavioral supports are not fluff. They're not stuff that we're doing because we're a bunch of liberals that want to hug kids to death. It's about creating environments that are going to keep our students safe, are going to create environments where students feel comfortable in reporting if they hear or suspect something, and also gives parents a place to connect with us as well.
Recess, not enough of it, used as punishment. How do we fix it? What's your feeling about recess?
Recess needs to be a part of the school day, just like fine arts needs to be part of the school day. We're investing $23 million this year. We're training more PE teachers. Recess should be much more structured in many ways so that it's physical activity. So I'm a big supporter of recess physical activity.
Wonderful. School libraries. What can you do to ensure every New York City school has a school library? What can we do to help? And how do we get them staffed by certified library media specialists?
Yeah, so been meeting with our higher ed partners. Can you tell I'm in my lightning round mode? I'll speak really fast. Working with our higher ed partners about producing more librarians, certified librarians. Even if we wanted to staff every school today with certified librarians, we don't have enough yet. So we want to make sure we're building that body. The second thing is that we need to get the $1.4 billion that we're owed so that we invest that into schools so we can build those libraries and have them equipped not only with books, because books are important, but we also technology now is part of what librarians do. Some of the finest coaches for finding information are librarians. And that's not only in the book stacks, but it's also electronically as well.
Awesome. Social workers. We need more. You like them, but there's a hiring freeze. How do we fix that?
Yeah, so we have a hiring freeze because, believe it or not, there's something called an ATR, right? Absent Teacher Reserve. Some people used to call it the rubber room. Please don't. It's not. I will tell you that the vast majority of the teachers, over 98% of the teachers that are in the ATR, the Absent Teacher Reserve Pool, are there because their schools were consolidated, they were closed, or they were somehow altered. And this school system in the previous administration had a love affair for creating small schools. So we took really big schools and then we made them a bunch of really small schools. And guess what? Teachers who have due process rights ended up getting squeezed out of opportunities. So where do they end up? They have a right to an employment. They're an ATR. So what we've done is we've frozen the hiring because we have a number of qualified people in the ATR pool that unfortunately get branded with a scarlet letter because they're an ATR, but they're qualified teachers and counselors and social workers. What we're doing is we're also working with principals. And look, I was a principal. I was a master at hiding my positions until everybody was placed. Right, principals? You don't have to admit to it, but I can see you're smiling. Right, because as a principal, if I'm responsible, I want to hire my people. I want them to go through my hiring process. I want them to meet with my parents. I want them to meet with my community. So what we're doing is we're working with principals to incentivize principals to take a look at the folks in the ATR. We're not going to force place anybody, but take a look at them. So for principals, part of the incentive is this. If you interview and you select somebody in the ATR pool, their complete salary is, we will pay their salary for the first year. Why? Because you've done something that we were asking you to do. If you keep them for the second year and you're evaluating and everything's good, then we will pick up half of their salary for the second year. And then by the second year and by the third year, that person that you've hired, you probably already know, yep, I want to keep this person. Then they are your financial responsibility. What a great incentive. That's why we have a hiring freeze, but we are committed to continue to hire counselors and social workers.